It was raining in Seattle, the kind of rain that seeps into your bones and makes the city feel colder than it should. Nathan Cole stood alone at the edge of the docks, his Navy SEAL career already erased on paper, his uniform still heavy on his shoulders, and the only thing left beside him was an aging German shepherd who refused to leave his side. Moments later, a wounded man collapsed in the shadows, and dangerous strangers began opening a container that was never meant to be found. Nathan had a choice: walk away and stay invisible, or step forward and change everything. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Seattle was unforgiving that morning. The kind of cold rain that didn't fall straight down but drifted sideways, needling through clothing, settling into bones, and refusing to leave. Low clouds pressed against the tops of buildings like a lid on a box that had been sealed too long. The city smelled of wet concrete, salt from the bay, and old iron. Industrial, tired, and indifferent. It was the sort of weather that reminded people of their insignificance, and for Nathan Cole, it felt personal. Nathan stood at the edge of the Naval Administrative Complex overlooking Elliott Bay, his boots planted firmly on rain-darkened pavement. He was still wearing his Navy SEAL uniform, deep navy blue, heavy fabric, stitched with years of discipline and habit. The uniform was clean, pressed, and correct in every regulation detail, yet it no longer granted him access to anything that mattered. The building behind him, all steel angles and reflective glass, had already decided he was finished. At 44, Nathan Cole looked like a man carved by necessity rather than vanity. He was tall, just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered but lean, built for endurance instead of display. His face was sharp and weathered, with high cheekbones and a jawline that seemed permanently clenched, as if relaxing it would be a luxury he could not afford. A trimmed beard, more functional than stylish, outlined his mouth and chin, peppered with early gray. His hair was cropped short, regulation cut, dark brown fading to silver at the temples. His eyes were a muted steel blue, the kind that rarely revealed emotion, but missed very little. They were eyes that had learned to measure distance, danger, and people in seconds. Nathan had been a SEAL for over 20 years. Not the loud kind, not the ones who told stories in bars or posed for photographs. He was a rescue medic, a specialist, the man you sent in when something had already gone wrong and someone needed to be brought back alive. He had pulled men out of collapsed buildings, dragged hostages through narrow corridors slick with blood, and stabilized bodies that should not have survived the night. He was known among his teams as steady, stubborn, and dangerously calm under pressure. Orders mattered to him. Lives mattered more. That had been the problem. The security badge clipped to his chest, matte black with his name and rank engraved in clean white letters, was dead now. He had discovered that 20 minutes earlier when the scanner by the secure entrance flashed red instead of green. No sound, no explanation, just a silent denial. Inside, a junior officer he barely recognized had avoided eye contact and told him, carefully, that his clearance had been suspended pending review. Review was a polite word. It meant someone with dry hands and no scars had decided Nathan Cole had crossed a line. Behind him, sitting patiently despite the cold, was Argo. The German shepherd was 12 years old, large even by the breed's standards, his once jet-black coat now threaded with gray along his muzzle and back. His ears stood alert, though one bore a small notch, a souvenir from shrapnel in Helmand Province years earlier. His amber-brown eyes were intelligent, watchful, and unsettlingly human at times. Argo had the posture of a soldier even in rest, front paws aligned, spine straight, tail still. He did not whine, he did not fidget, he waited. Argo had served 2 deployments alongside Nathan before being retired due to age and injury. Officially, he was no longer active. In practice, he had never stopped working. He followed Nathan everywhere, home, training runs, early morning walks along the bay. Where Nathan went, Argo went. There was no command required. Loyalty had long ago replaced instruction. Nathan glanced down at the dog, then back toward the building. Rain collected on his shoulders, darkening the fabric of his uniform. He didn't move to wipe it away. The memory replayed itself without permission. A narrow concrete corridor, emergency lights flickering, a hostage bleeding out from a collapsed lung while command barked orders through static-filled radios. Extract and fall back. Wait for clearance. Hold position. Nathan had looked at the man's face, young, terrified, drowning on dry land, and made a decision. He broke formation. He improvised. He saved the man's life. They called it failure to comply. Nathan had not argued during the inquiry. He never did. Words had always felt inadequate compared to action. He answered questions simply, without drama, without apology. When asked if he would make the same decision again, he said yes. That was when the tone in the room changed. A door opened behind him. The sound was subtle, but Argo's ears twitched instantly. Lieutenant Commander Richard Hale stepped out onto the covered walkway. Hale was a man in his early 50s, tall and narrow, with a permanent crease between his eyebrows and hair that had surrendered to gray long before its time. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid, his expression professionally neutral. Hale had never been a field operator. His power came from policies, not scars. "Cole," Hale said, stopping a few feet away. He did not offer his hand. Nathan turned. "Sir?" Hale glanced at Argo briefly, then back to Nathan. "You've been officially relieved of active duty pending further review. Your equipment will be logged. Your access is suspended. You'll be contacted if—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If the board reaches a determination." Nathan nodded once. He did not ask how long that might take. Hale shifted his weight. "You're a good operator," he added, quieter now. "One of the best. But rules exist for a reason." "So do exceptions," Nathan replied calmly. Hale's jaw tightened. "This isn't a discussion." "No, sir," Nathan said. Silence stretched between them, filled by rain and the distant cry of gulls. Hale cleared his throat. "You can go." Nathan reached up and unclipped the badge from his chest. For a moment, he held it in his palm. It was heavier than it looked. Years ago, that small piece of plastic and metal had meant belonging, purpose, brotherhood. Now, it was just an object. He placed it on the concrete railing between them. Argo stood. Hale took a step back, instinctively tense, but Argo did nothing more than move closer to Nathan's leg, protective, watchful. Nathan turned away without another word. His boots echoed softly as he walked down the long path toward the street. No ceremony marked his departure, no salutes, no music. The base swallowed its doors behind him like it always did. Outside the gates, Seattle went on living. Cars passed. A ferry horn sounded in the distance. People hurried beneath umbrellas, unaware that a man who had saved more lives than they would ever know had just been quietly erased. Nathan stopped at the curb. He adjusted the strap of the worn canvas duffel slung over his shoulder. Inside were a few clothes, a folded American flag, a photograph of a woman with warm eyes and dark hair, his sister, long gone, and Argo's leash. He looked down at the dog. "Well," he said softly, voice roughened by disuse. "Looks like it's just us." Argo met his gaze. Then, slowly, deliberately, he sat. The rain kept falling. Seattle did not care. And Nathan Cole, still wearing a uniform that no longer mattered, took his first step into a world that no longer had a place for him. Yet. Nathan Cole walked south along Alaskan Way, the bay on his left a sheet of hammered steel under the rain. The wind came off the water, sharp and wet, pushing the smell of salt and diesel into the narrow streets. Seattle in winter did not ask how a man was doing. It assumed he would endure. Nathan's stride was steady, practiced, the same pace he had kept on patrols in places where stopping meant dying. The uniform clung heavier now, soaked through at the seams, but he did not adjust it. He had worn worse in worse places. Argo padded at his side without a leash, close enough that Nathan could feel the warmth of the dog's body through the cold. The shepherd's gait had slowed with age, but his presence was constant, grounding. His nails clicked softly against the pavement, a familiar rhythm that steadied Nathan's thoughts. Every few steps, Argo glanced up, checking Nathan's face the way he had learned to do years ago, reading tension, waiting for cues that no longer came in, spoken commands. Nathan's destination, if it could be called that, was a small rented house near West Seattle, a modest place with peeling paint and a narrow porch that creaked in the wind. It had never felt like a home in the sentimental sense. It was simply where he slept between deployments. Still, it was all he had now. As he crossed an intersection, a bus roared past, spraying water up his pant legs. He didn't react. Discomfort had long ago stopped registering as a problem. His mind drifted, uninvited, to the last mission briefing. The room had been too warm, the air stale with recycled breath and tension. Younger operators sat straight-backed, eyes forward, waiting for permission to exist. Nathan had noticed the medic trainee in the corner, barely 30, hands shaking, as he checked his kit for the third time. Nathan had caught his eye and given a small nod. It was enough. The shaking stopped. Leadership was not about rank. It was about presence. That understanding had guided Nathan his entire career. It was also what had made him inconvenient. At a crosswalk, Nathan paused. The light changed. He didn't move. Argo stopped with him, ears forward, posture alert. Across the street, a woman stood under the awning of a closed cafe, smoking despite the rain. She was in her late 30s, average height, wrapped in a worn brown coat that looked too thin for the weather. Her hair, a dark auburn, was pulled into a loose knot at the base of her neck, strands plastered to her pale cheeks. Her eyes were sharp, observant in a way that suggested she noticed more than she spoke. When she looked at Nathan, there was no pity in her gaze, only curiosity. Her name was Sarah Whitaker, though Nathan did not know that yet. She lived 2 houses down from him and worked nights as an emergency dispatcher. Years of hearing strangers scream into a headset had given her a calm exterior and a habit of watching people's hands. She noticed the uniform first, then the dog, then the way Nathan stood, still, balanced, as if the world might tilt without warning. She exhaled smoke slowly, eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but recognition. The light changed again. Nathan crossed. Sarah flicked her cigarette into a puddle and turned away, already filing the image of the man and his dog somewhere in her mind. People like that tended to circle back into her life in one way or another. The house came into view at last. Nathan climbed the steps, the wood groaning under his weight. He unlocked the door, ushered Argo inside, and followed. The interior smelled faintly of coffee grounds and old wood. Sparse furniture filled the space. A couch with a blanket folded too neatly, a scarred wooden table, a bookshelf holding manuals, field guides, and a few dog-eared paperbacks. The walls were bare except for a single-frame photograph of Nathan and Argo taken years earlier, both younger, both unscarred by time. Nathan set the duffel down and removed his wet jacket, hanging it by the door. He knelt to unlace his boots, hands moving automatically. Argo lowered himself onto the rug, joints stiff, and sighed, a long, tired sound that carried more weight than words. Nathan rested a hand on the dog's broad head, fingers tracing the familiar ridge of his skull. "I know," Nathan murmured. "I know." He stood, moved to the kitchen, and filled a bowl with water, then another with food. Argo ate slowly, deliberately, pausing now and then to listen to the rain. Nathan leaned against the counter, watching the dog with an intensity that bordered on guilt. He had promised himself he would retire Argo somewhere warm, somewhere quiet. That promise had slipped, lost between deployments and denials. Now, like everything else, it would have to wait. The afternoon wore on. Nathan showered, changed into dry clothes, plain jeans, a gray long-sleeve shirt, and folded his uniform with care. He placed it at the bottom of the duffel, not out of shame, but respect. The uniform had not failed him. People had. As dusk settled, the rain eased into a fine mist. Nathan stepped back outside with Argo, needing air. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence that came from people choosing to stay indoors. Streetlights flickered on, casting halos in the damp air. Nathan walked without direction, letting the streets guide him. Halfway down the block, Argo stopped. Not a casual pause, not the stiffness of age. This was different. His body went rigid, muscles tensing beneath his graying coat. His ears angled forward, nose lifted, drawing in scents Nathan could not perceive. The dog's tail stilled. Nathan followed Argo's gaze. There was nothing obvious, just parked cars, darkened windows, the distant hum of traffic. Still, Nathan felt it then, a tightening in his chest he had learned to trust, the sense that the world had shifted a fraction off-center. "What is it, boy?" Nathan asked quietly. Argo did not look at him. His focus was fixed down the street, toward the industrial stretch near the docks. A low rumble rolled through the air, not loud, not immediate, but wrong. Nathan straightened, every sense sharpening despite himself. He reminded himself that he was no longer on duty. No radio, no authority, just a man and a dog in a city that did not need saving. But Argo took a step forward. Nathan hesitated, then followed. They did not go far. At the end of the block, Argo stopped again, this time glancing back at Nathan, eyes bright with intent. The look was unmistakable. It was the same look he had worn in deserts and mountains half a world away, the look that said, "Pay attention." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Easy," he said, more to himself than the dog. The rumble faded. Whatever had stirred Argo's instincts slipped back into the city's noise, leaving only questions behind. Nathan placed a hand on Argo's shoulder, grounding both of them. He did not chase shadows. He had learned that lesson the hard way. They turned back toward the house. Inside, Nathan locked the door and sat on the couch, elbows on knees, hands clasped loosely. Argo lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, but eyes still open, vigilant. Nathan stared at the opposite wall, thoughts drifting not to regret but to readiness. He had been told to wait before. Waiting had never saved anyone. Somewhere beyond the rain and concrete, something was moving. Not yet a call, not yet a command, just a pressure in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Whatever came next, he would meet it standing. Night settled over Seattle like a damp blanket pulled too tight. The rain had thinned to a mist, but the air remained heavy, pressing against skin and thought alike. Sodium streetlights cast long, trembling reflections on the asphalt, turning puddles into shards of dull gold. From the direction of the docks came the steady, familiar noises of the city at work, container cranes groaning, engines idling, the distant slap of water against steel. It was a rhythm Nathan Cole knew well. It was also why the sound that followed made him stop breathing for half a second. It was not loud. That was what made it dangerous. Argo lifted his head before Nathan consciously registered anything wrong. The German Shepherd rose from the rug in a smooth, economical motion, joints stiff but while unbroken. His ears angled forward, nostrils flaring as he drew in the night. His tail did not wag. It never did when something mattered. A low vibration passed through his chest. Not a growl, not yet, but a warning held in reserve. Nathan stood from the couch slowly, careful not to startle the dog or whatever had caught his attention. He listened. At first, there was nothing out of place. The hum of the refrigerator, rain tapping the windows. Then he heard it, a metallic click, distant but distinct, followed by a muffled thud. The sound did not belong to the neighborhood's usual language. It was the sound of force meeting resistance. Controlled, deliberate. Nathan's body responded before his thoughts caught up. His shoulders squared, spine straightening, every muscle aligning toward readiness. He was not armed. He reminded himself of that. He was not authorized. That reminder meant less. Some habits could not be unlearned. He moved to the window and peered through the blinds toward the street. Nothing. Argo turned his head toward the back of the house, where the alley ran parallel to the docks. His hackles rose, the gray along his spine lifting slightly. He glanced at Nathan, eyes bright, asking a question without words. Nathan exhaled slowly. "All right," he murmured, the decision forming even as he spoke. "We look. We don't rush." He grabbed a jacket, slipped it on, and opened the back door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and briny. Argo moved past him, silent as a shadow, paws barely making sound on the wet concrete. The alley was narrow, flanked by fences, and the backs of warehouses converted into apartments. A single flickering light buzzed overhead, illuminating trash bins and puddles. Halfway down the alley, Argo stopped again. This time, Nathan heard it too. A strained voice, low and urgent, cut short by pain. "Help!" Nathan's jaw tightened. He signaled Argo to stay with a subtle hand motion, then advanced a few steps. Near the end of the alley, behind a rusted delivery van, a man lay slumped against the brick wall. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered but sagging with exhaustion, wearing a dark jacket soaked through with rain. His hair was gray and thinning, plastered to his forehead. A beard, once neatly kept, now wild and streaked with white, framed a face twisted in pain. The man's breathing was wrong, shallow, rapid. His right hand clutched his side, fingers slick with blood. Nathan knelt without thinking. "Sir," he said calmly, "can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open. They were pale blue, unfocused but aware. "Doc, security," he rasped. "Name's Frank Delaney." Frank Delaney had the look of someone who had worked outdoors most of his life. Skin weathered, hands thick with old calluses. There was a hardness in his features softened now by fear and shock. His jacket bore the faded emblem of a private security company contracted by the Port Authority. Nathan clocked the details quickly, methodically. No visible weapon. Blood seeping from beneath the jacket on the lower right side, possibly a puncture wound. What happened? Nathan asked, already pressing gently near, the wound to assess damage. Frank sucked in a breath, hissed. Caught. 2 guys, near Pier 12. Thought they were stealing copper. One of them, knife, ran. Nathan nodded once. Knife wounds were unpredictable, dangerous. He peeled back the jacket carefully. The wound was small but deep, the kind that could do real damage without dramatic bleeding. Frank's skin was pale, clammy. Argo stepped closer, head low, eyes fixed on Frank's face. The shepherd sniffed once, then settled beside him, offering warmth without intrusion. Frank's eyes widened slightly. "Dog," he whispered, voice trembling. "Good dog." Nathan allowed himself a brief glance at Argo. "He's working," he said, "just like us." Nathan pressed his jacket against the wound, applying steady pressure. "Frank, I need you to stay with me. I'm going to call this in." He reached for his phone, then hesitated. The screen lit up. No service bars flickered to life. The alley, hemmed in by concrete and steel, swallowed signals whole. Frank coughed weakly. "They're still there," he said. "Pier 12, containers marked medical supply, not supposed to be here." Nathan felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Medical supply containers at the docks after hours. Knives instead of bolt cutters. This wasn't a random theft. This was organized, urgent, and dangerous in ways Frank likely didn't understand. "I'm going to get you help," Nathan said, voice even. "I need to move." Frank grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength. "Don't," he pleaded. "They'll come back." Argo's ears snapped upright. He turned his head toward the far end of the alley, muscles tensing again. Footsteps echoed faintly, just once, then stopped. Someone was nearby. Nathan made a decision. He pulled the folded leash from his pocket and looped it around a nearby pipe, securing Argo in place. The dog did not resist, though his eyes burned with intent. "Stay," Nathan whispered, meeting his gaze. "Protect." Argo lowered himself beside Frank, body angled between the wounded man and the darkness. His chest rumbled with a low, continuous growl. Not loud enough to carry, but enough to promise consequences. Nathan moved silently toward the mouth of the alley, blending into shadow. Years of training reasserted themselves, not as orders, but as instinct. He did not seek confrontation. He sought information. At the edge of the alley, he peered toward the docks. Pier 12 loomed ahead, a skeleton of steel and light. 2 figures moved near a stack of containers, their shapes indistinct but purposeful. One stood watch, while the other worked at a container seal with practiced efficiency. They wore dark clothing, hoods pulled low. This was not their first time. Nathan felt the old conflict rise in him, the pull between involvement and restraint. He was no longer sanctioned, no longer shielded by rank or authority. If he stepped forward now, there would be consequences. There always were. Behind him, Frank groaned softly. Argo's growl deepened. Nathan closed his eyes for half a second. Then he opened them. He retreated carefully, returning to Frank. He knelt, checked the wound again, tightened the pressure. "Help's coming," he said, though he had no way to be sure yet. Nathan glanced toward the street. A single house light flicked on nearby. A figure stood in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear. Sarah Whitaker's silhouette was unmistakable, even at a distance, straight-backed, alert. She looked toward the alley, then at Nathan, recognition flashing across her face. She had heard something too. The city was beginning to listen. Nathan met her gaze and gave a short, decisive nod, the kind meant to communicate urgency without panic. Sarah's expression hardened. She turned back inside, already speaking into her phone, voice low but controlled. Dispatcher instincts, the right kind. Nathan returned his focus to Frank and Argo. The situation had shifted. It was no longer just a wounded man in an alley. It was a thread pulling him back toward a world he had been told to leave. The rain began to fall harder again, drumming against metal and concrete, masking movement, masking sound. Somewhere near Pier 12, a container door creaked open. Nathan tightened his grip, steady as stone. This was not a mission, but it was not nothing. The docks never truly slept. Even past midnight, Pier 12 breathed with a slow, mechanical rhythm. Chains clinking softly, cables humming under tension, water slapping against pylons like a restless pulse. The rain thickened, blurring the yellow work lights into hazy halos and turning the concrete slick and treacherous. It was the kind of environment where mistakes hid easily and consequences came fast. Nathan Cole crouched behind a stack of discarded pallets at the edge of the pier, rain soaking through the knees of his jeans. From here, he had a partial view of the container yard. The two men he had spotted earlier were still there. Closer now, their movements more deliberate. One stood watch near a forklift, tall and wiry, posture loose but alert. The other worked the container seal with practiced hands, shoulders hunched, head angled to shield his face from the rain. Nathan studied them the way he always had, quietly, thoroughly. The man on watch moved like someone who had learned to fight but no longer did it for sport. His beard was thick and uneven, dark with streaks of red, and his hood couldn't quite hide the sharp angles of his face. He scanned the pier in slow arcs, not nervous, just thorough. The second man was broader, heavier through the chest, his movements economical despite his size. A scar ran from his left ear down into his collar, pale against his skin, the kind that came from something sharp and close. These were not desperate thieves, they were professionals. Behind Nathan, back in the alley, Argo lay beside Frank Delaney, unmoving except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. The dog's growl, low and constant, echoed faintly in Nathan's memory. He trusted Argo's judgment more than his own sometimes. The shepherd did not react to shadows, he reacted to intent. Nathan's phone vibrated once in his pocket. A text message, short and precise. Sarah, units dispatched, Port Authority and Seattle PD, ETA unknown, be careful. Nathan exhaled slowly. Sarah Whitaker had done exactly what he expected. Calm, under pressure, efficient. He pictured her standing in her small kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, auburn hair still damp from the rain, eyes sharp and focused, as she relayed details in a voice that never wavered. Dispatchers lived in the space between chaos and order. They learned to carry fear without showing it. He typed back quickly. Nathan, I'm watching, not engaging. The words felt like a promise and a lie at the same time. A metallic snap cut through the rain. The container door shifted slightly, opening just enough to reveal darkness inside. The broader man grunted, then braced his shoulder and forced it wider. A faint interior light flickered on, spilling pale white onto the wet ground. Medical supply containers were marked clearly. This one wasn't. No logos, no serials, just a dull gray box that looked like 1,000 others, unless you knew what to look for. Nathan did. The refrigeration unit mounted on the side was overpowered for standard supplies. Whatever was inside needed to stay cold, or alive. The man on watch stiffened suddenly, head turning toward the alley. Nathan froze. Rain dripped from his hair into his eyes, but he didn't blink. Seconds stretched. Then the man relaxed slightly, muttering something Nathan couldn't hear. Too close. Nathan shifted back, muscles protesting quietly. He was aware of every disadvantage stacked against him. No weapon, no badge, no authority. He was a civilian now, at least on paper. If this went wrong, there would be no extraction, no explanation that anyone wanted to hear. And yet, inside the container, the broader man swore softly. He stepped back, wiping rain from his face, and called out, "It's compromised!" The word cut sharper than the rain. The man on watch swore under his breath. "We don't have time." They argued in low voices, tension rising. Nathan caught fragments: delay, transfer, buyer. This wasn't just theft. It was trafficking. Medical-grade equipment, maybe pharmaceuticals, maybe something worse. The implications settled heavy in Nathan's gut. A sudden cough echoed faintly from the alley behind him. Frank. Nathan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The line he'd been walking all night grew thinner with each passing moment. He pulled his jacket tighter and shifted position, preparing to move back toward Frank when a third figure emerged from between the containers. This one moved differently, shorter, compact, shoulders tight with contained aggression. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his right leg, but it didn't slow him. His head was shaved clean, rain beating on his scalp, and his face was all hard planes and old anger. A thin mustache lined his upper lip, meticulously kept. This was Victor Kane. Nathan didn't know his name, but he knew the type instantly. Kane had the bearing of someone who had once followed orders and been burned for it. There was a coldness to him, an impatience that came from years of resentment sharpened into purpose. Men like that didn't steal to survive. They stole to prove something. Kane spoke briefly to the others, voice clipped. They nodded. Decisions were being made quickly now. Nathan felt the shift before he fully understood it. This was about to escalate. He retreated silently, moving back through the rain toward the alley. Argo heard him before he saw him, head lifting, eyes locked onto Nathan's face. Frank's breathing was worse now, shallow and uneven. "They're leaving," Nathan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. But not empty-handed. Argo's ears flicked back toward the pier. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, still far off, too far. Nathan knelt beside Frank again, checking the wound. Blood soaked through the jacket faster now. Shock was setting in. Frank's eyes fluttered, unfocused. "Stay with me," Nathan said firmly, pressing harder. "Help's coming." Frank's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Knew someone would," he whispered. A sudden shout echoed from the pier. One of the men had spotted movement. Maybe a reflection, maybe intuition. Footsteps pounded closer, splashing through puddles. Argo rose instantly, placing himself squarely between Frank and the approaching sound. His growl deepened, rolling out of him like distant thunder. Nathan stood. This was the moment he had been avoiding. Watching was no longer enough. Someone was about to get hurt, maybe worse. He weighed the risks in a heartbeat. If he stepped forward, he crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. If he didn't, he would live with it. Nathan stepped forward. He moved into the light deliberately, hands visible, posture calm but unmistakably controlled. The man with the beard skidded to a stop a few yards away, surprise flashing across his face as he took in Nathan's stance, the dog at his side, the wounded man behind them. "Back away," Nathan said, voice steady, carrying easily over the rain. "This ends now." The bearded man hesitated, eyes flicking to Argo's bared teeth, then back to Nathan's face. He saw it then, the confidence that didn't come from bravado, the stillness of someone who had already survived worse. Behind him, Victor Kane appeared, limping slightly as he stepped into the light. His eyes locked onto Nathan's uniform jacket, then narrowed. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Kane asked, voice sharp, dangerous. Nathan met his gaze without flinching. "Someone who doesn't like bullies," he said simply. The rain fell harder, washing the pier in silver streaks. Sirens grew louder now, closer. Kane smiled thinly. "You picked a bad night to play hero." Nathan didn't smile back. This wasn't heroism, it was instinct. The rain came down harder, no longer a curtain, but a hammering presence that flattened sound and blurred distance. On Pier 12, the world narrowed to a stretch of wet concrete, a wounded man in the shadows, a dog standing like a living barricade, and 3 criminals reassessing a situation that had stopped going according to plan. Sirens wailed somewhere beyond the maze of warehouses. Closer now, but still not close enough to matter. Victor Kane studied Nathan Cole with the careful interest of a predator encountering something unfamiliar. Up close, Kane's limp was more pronounced. His right leg stiff as if the joint had been rebuilt badly after an old injury. His frame was compact, muscle packed tight beneath his dark jacket, and the rain traced sharp lines down his shaved head. The thin mustache above his lip was too deliberate, groomed with a precision that suggested control was something he clung to fiercely. His eyes were the most telling part, dark, restless, measuring not just the man in front of him, but the space, the timing, the odds. Nathan did not move. He stood with his feet planted, shoulders relaxed, hands open and visible, his body language neither aggressive nor submissive. The calm he projected was not an act. It was the same calm that had steadied panicked soldiers and dying civilians alike. Years ago, a mission in Fallujah had taught him what panic cost. He had buried that lesson deep, and it surfaced now as naturally as breath. Behind him, Argo held his ground. The German shepherd's lips curled back just enough to show teeth worn smooth by age and use. At 12, Argo was no longer the fastest dog on the field, but speed had never been his greatest weapon. Discipline was. His body was angled to shield Frank Delaney, who lay half-conscious against the brick wall, chest rising in shallow, uneven pulls. The dog's eyes never left Kane. The bearded man, Kane's lookout, shifted his weight, knuckles whitening around the knife in his hand. He was tall and lanky, beard soaked and clinging to his jaw, eyes darting between Nathan and the growing glow of emergency lights in the distance. He was younger than Kane, mid-30s at most, with the nervous energy of someone who followed orders because he lacked a better plan. "Walk away," Kane said finally, voice low and roughened by years of cigarettes and disillusionment. "This isn't your business." Nathan's gaze flicked briefly to Frank, then back to Kane. It became my business when you left a man bleeding in an alley. Kane snorted softly. He got curious. Curiosity's expensive. Nathan tilted his head slightly, a habit he had when listening more than speaking. You don't strike me as someone who likes witnesses, he said, which means you don't plan to leave quietly. Kane's smile thinned. For a moment, something like amusement crossed his face. You talk like someone who used to wear a badge, he said, or a uniform. Nathan did, not deny it. He had learned long ago that silence unsettled people more than excuses. The lookout glanced back toward the container yard. Boss, he muttered, sirens are close. I hear them, Kane snapped, irritation flashing. His eyes returned to Nathan, sharpening. Last chance. Nathan exhaled slowly. He did not raise his voice. Drop the knife, he said, nodding toward the lookout. Step back. No one else gets hurt tonight. For a heartbeat, the rain was the only sound. Then Kane moved. He didn't lunge. He didn't shout. He took a short step to the side, drawing Nathan's attention just long enough for the lookout to rush forward, blade flashing low toward Nathan's midsection. It was a coordinated move, practiced and efficient. Argo reacted instantly. The shepherd launched himself forward with a deep, explosive bark, body slamming into the lookout's legs. The man cried out as he went down hard, knife skittering across the concrete. Argo didn't bite immediately. He pinned, all weight and pressure, teeth snapping inches from flesh, a clear message delivered with terrifying restraint. Nathan moved at the same time. He stepped into Kane's space, catching the man's wrist as Kane swung, redirecting the force and twisting until Kane hissed in pain. Years of close-quarters training took over, not as a series of techniques, but as a fluid response. Nathan didn't strike to punish. He struck to disable. An elbow to the ribs, a sharp shove. Kane stumbled back, favoring his bad leg, cursing under his breath. Stay down, Nathan ordered the lookout, who lay gasping beneath Argo's weight. The dog's growl vibrated through the man's chest, promising consequences if he moved. Kane recovered quickly, eyes blazing now, anger cutting through his calculated calm. You think you're some kind of savior? He snarled. You don't know who you're dealing with. Nathan held his ground. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, he said, someone who thinks pain gives him permission. Kane laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Pain taught me everything, he spat. You ever get left behind, Cole? The use of his name hit like a sudden drop in temperature. Nathan's eyes narrowed, just slightly. You've done your homework. Kane's smile returned, ugly and triumphant. We all have, he said. Men like you don't disappear. You just get quieter. Before Nathan could respond, a voice cut through the rain. Police, hands where we can see them. Flashlights flared, harsh white beams slicing through the darkness. Seattle PD officers spilled onto the pier from two directions, weapons raised, movements sharp and practiced. A taller officer in the lead barked orders, rain plastering his short blonde hair to his forehead. His face was young, but lined with the kind of tension that came from seeing too much too soon. Down! Now! Kane hesitated, eyes darting, calculating escape, routes that no longer existed. Then he raised his hands slowly, a sneer still clinging to his mouth. The lookout followed suit from the ground, whimpering softly as Argo backed away at Nathan's signal. Nathan stepped back, lifting his own hands. I'm unarmed, he said clearly. Man behind me is injured. Officers moved in fast, cuffing Kane and the lookout, hauling them to their feet. One officer knelt beside Frank, swearing under his breath as he assessed the wound. Ambulance is 2 minutes out, the officer called. Another officer approached Nathan, eyes flicking to Argo warily. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the dog. Nathan nodded once and placed a hand on Argo's collar. Easy, he murmured. The dog obeyed immediately, stepping back and sitting, eyes still locked on Kane as he was led away. As Kane passed Nathan, he leaned close, voice low enough that only Nathan could hear. This isn't over, he said. You stepped back into the T. Light tonight. That makes you visible. Nathan met his gaze without flinching. Good, he replied. The ambulance arrived in a rush of light and noise. Paramedics moved quickly, efficient and focused. Frank Delaney was loaded onto a stretcher, his breathing already steadier under oxygen. As they wheeled him past Nathan, Frank's eyes fluttered open briefly. Did we get them? He whispered. Nathan nodded. You did your job, he said. Rest now. Frank managed a weak smile before slipping back into unconsciousness. The officers began taping off the area, radios crackling with updates. One of them, a sergeant with a graying beard and tired eyes, approached Nathan. He looked Nathan up and down, taking in the stance, the calm, the dog. "Name?" the sergeant asked. "Nathan Cole." The sergeant paused, brow furrowing. "You military?" "Former," Nathan replied. The sergeant studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're lucky," he said. "And you're not. We're going to have some questions." Nathan expected that. He looked down at Argo, who gazed back up at him, tail thumping once against the wet ground. Sirens faded into the background. Rain softened. The night exhaled. Nathan Cole stood on the edge of the pier, soaked and exhausted, aware that the choice he had made could not be undone. He had crossed the line between watching and acting. Whatever came next, investigations, consequences, attention, he would face it the same way he faced everything else, standing. The rain finally let up just before dawn, as if the city itself had decided it had seen enough. Wet asphalt gleamed under the streetlights that's around Pier 12, cordoned off now by yellow tape and the quiet authority of uniforms. The sirens were gone. In their place came the hum of generators, the clipped radio chatter of officers doing paperwork, and the low murmur of people who would be telling this story differently by morning. Nathan Cole sat on the rear bumper of a patrol SUV, hands resting loosely on his knees. His jeans were still damp, his jacket streaked with grime, but his posture remained composed. Argo lay at his feet, chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded yet alert, as if sleep were a courtesy he might grant the night, but only briefly. The German shepherd's coat was matted with rain, gray fur darkened along his spine. At 12, Argo moved more carefully now, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath the age. Across from Nathan stood Detective Mark Alvarez, Seattle PD, Major Crimes. Alvarez was in his late 40s, thick through the shoulders, with a heavy brow and a neatly trimmed black beard shot through with gray. His face bore the tired patience of a man who had learned that truth rarely arrived whole. He wore a plain dark coat over his suit, collar turned up against the cold, notebook tucked under one arm. Years earlier, a bad call during a hostage standoff had cost Alvarez a partner. Since then, he trusted instinct, but verified everything twice. Alvarez studied Nathan for a long moment before speaking. "You want to tell me again," he said evenly, "why you were at the docks tonight?" Nathan didn't bristle. He didn't rush. "I heard something wrong," he replied. "Found a wounded man, stayed with him." "And then confronted two suspects," Alvarez said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Unarmed." "Yes." Alvarez exhaled slowly through his nose. "You realize how that sounds." Nathan met his gaze. "I do." The detective flipped open his notebook. "Frank Delaney's going to make it," he said. "He's stable. Says you kept him alive." Nathan nodded once, a flicker of relief crossing his face before it vanished. "Good." Alvarez watched that flicker closely. "You ex-military?" "Former Navy," Nathan said. "Rescue medic." Alvarez's pen paused. He looked up. "SEAL?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. He glanced down at Argo, then back up. "Yes." That earned a low whistle from a uniformed officer nearby. Alvarez said nothing, but his eyes sharpened with new interest. "Then you know," Alvarez said carefully, "that what you did tonight walks a thin line. Vigilantism isn't protected by a resume." Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. "Neither is standing by while someone bleeds out." Silence stretched. Alvarez closed his notebook with a soft snap. "You're not under arrest," he said. "Not tonight. But this case won't stay simple. The container your friends were opening," he shook his head. "It wasn't logged with the port. Refrigerated. Medical grade. That puts this above my pay grade real fast." Nathan absorbed that without comment. A woman approached then, moving with brisk efficiency despite the late hour. Dr. Elaine Porter, medical examiner for King County, was tall and spare, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun. Thin-framed glasses perched on a sharp nose, and her eyes missed nothing. She glanced at Nathan, then at Argo, then back to Alvarez. "Your dog's impressive," she said flatly. "K9? "Retired," Nathan replied. Porter nodded once, then turned back to Alvarez. "One of the suspects has prior federal convictions. Smuggling. Pharmaceuticals mostly. If Kane's involved, this is bigger than a port theft." The name landed heavy. Nathan's eyes lifted. Kane, he said quietly. Porter arched a brow. You know him? Not personally, Nathan said, but he knew me. Alvarez and Porter exchanged a look, the kind that acknowledged complication without speaking it aloud. Mr. Cole, Alvarez said, I'm going to recommend you keep a low profile. Media will catch wind of this. They always do. Nathan gave a humorless smile. I'm not exactly high profile these days. Alvarez's expression softened, just a fraction. Men like you don't stay invisible, he said. They just get found later. The detective turned away, issuing quiet instructions to his team. Porter followed, already tapping notes into her phone. The scene began to break down, tape coming down, vehicles pulling away, the pier returning to its usual anonymity. Sarah Whitaker approached from the edge of the light, arms crossed against the chill. Up close, she looked smaller than Nathan had imagined, slender, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of long nights and hard calls. Her auburn hair had dried into loose waves around her shoulders, and her green eyes were sharp, but kind. You okay? She asked simply. Nathan nodded. Thanks for the call. Sarah shrugged. Part of the job. She hesitated, then glanced at Argo. He's incredible. Argo lifted his head at the sound of her voice, tail thumping once in acknowledgement before settling again. He is, Nathan said. A low engine rumble drifted across the pier then, different from the police vehicles. A dark SUV idled near the far gate, headlights off. Nathan's eyes tracked it automatically. A man stepped out briefly, tall, broad, wearing a plain coat that didn't quite hide the way he moved. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He simply watched. Then he got back in the vehicle, and it pulled away. Nathan felt a familiar prickle along his spine. Sarah followed his gaze. Friend of yours? No, Nathan said quietly. Not yet. The sun began to edge up behind the warehouses, painting the clouds in thin bands of pale gold. The night's tension loosened its grip, replaced by exhaustion and the weight of what came next. Nathan clipped Argo's leash back on and stood. I should get him home, he said. He's earned it. Sarah nodded. You should get yourself home too. As they walked away from the pier, Nathan knew the questions wouldn't end with sunrise. Kane's words echoed in his mind. Visibility had a cost. Tonight, Nathan had paid the first installment, and somewhere beyond the docks, someone had noticed. Morning arrived without ceremony. Seattle's sky remained a dull slate. The clouds stretched thin and exhausted after a night of rain. The streets around Nathan Cole's neighborhood steamed faintly as water evaporated from asphalt and roofs. It was the hour when the city pretended nothing extraordinary had happened, when people carried coffee and routines like shields against the unknown. Nathan unlocked his front door and let Argo inside first. The German shepherd moved stiffly, age settling deeper into his joints after the long night. At 12, Argo no longer bounded into rooms. He entered with care, circled once, and lowered himself onto the rug near the couch, releasing a breath that carried equal parts fatigue and satisfaction. His coat was still damp, the gray around his muzzle darker now, but his eyes remained sharp. Nathan closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. The quiet felt heavier than the rain ever had. He rolled his shoulders slowly, easing tension that never fully left his body. The night replayed in fragments. Kane's voice, the flash of a knife, the sound of Argo hitting concrete, the look in the detective's eyes when the word federal entered the conversation. He moved through the house on autopilot, kettle on, coffee grounds measured, jacket hung to dry. The discipline of small tasks steadied him. For years, structure had been something imposed from the outside. Now he imposed it himself. The kettle hadn't finished boiling when his phone vibrated on the counter. Unknown number. Nathan stared at the screen. He hadn't given his number to anyone new, not the police, not the Port Authority. He glanced at Argo, who lifted his head immediately, ears angling forward. The dog didn't growl. He didn't relax either. Nathan answered, Cole. There was a pause on the other end. Not the awkward pause of a wrong number, a deliberate one. Nathan, a man's voice said, calm and measured, older, seasoned. This is Thomas. Reed. The name meant nothing to most people. To Nathan it rang faintly, like an echo from another life. Reed was not famous. He had never been meant to be. Men like Reed existed in the margins, their work felt but rarely seen. I don't know you, Nathan said. Reed chuckled softly. You know my work, he replied, and you know I wouldn't call unless it mattered. Nathan felt the subtle shift in the room. the way air seemed to tighten around certain words. "You're calling about last night." "Yes." Nathan didn't ask how Reed had his number. He already knew the answer. "I didn't break any laws." "No," Reed agreed. "You broke patterns." Nathan said nothing. Reed continued, "Victor Kane was on a watch list we haven't been able to close in 3 years. He's careful, uses intermediaries. Last night he got sloppy." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Because of me." "Because of who you are," Reed corrected gently. The kettle whistled. Nathan turned it off and poured water into a mug, movement slow and controlled. "If this is a warning," he said, "I already got one." Reed's voice softened, just a fraction. "This isn't a warning, it's an acknowledgement." Silence stretched again. Nathan waited. "There's a meeting," Reed said. "Not an interview, no paperwork, no uniforms, just a conversation. You can walk away at any point." "Where?" "Not over the phone." Nathan looked down at Argo. The dog had risen to his feet now, standing squarely, gaze fixed on Nathan's face. He recognized this posture, the readiness without command, the quiet agreement. "When?" Nathan asked. Reed smiled, audible in his voice. "Today, noon, you'll get a location." The line went dead. Nathan set the phone down slowly. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel fear. He felt the weight of inevitability, the kind that came when the world finally stopped pretending you were finished. A knock came at the door, less than 10 minutes later. Nathan opened it to find Sarah Whitaker standing on the porch, a paper bag tucked under one arm. She wore a navy hoodie and jeans, her auburn hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, dispatcher hours, but her posture was alert, grounded. She held up the bag slightly. "Thought you might need breakfast," she said. "After last night?" Nathan hesitated, then stepped aside. "You didn't have to." Sarah entered, Bert, glancing automatically around the room, the way people trained for emergencies always did. Her eyes softened when she saw Argo. "He looks tired," she said. "He is," Nathan replied. "So am I." She set the bag on the counter and leaned back against it, studying Nathan with open curiosity now that the urgency had passed. "The detectives were asking about you this morning," she said. "Nothing bad, just interested." Nathan nodded. "They will be." Sarah crossed her arms. "You're not just some guy who stumbled into trouble, are you?" Nathan considered deflecting. He didn't. "No." She accepted that without pressing further. Another mark in her favor. "Be careful," she said instead. "Whatever comes next." Nathan met her gaze. "I always am." Sarah smiled faintly. "That's what worries me." She left soon after, the quiet returning once more. Nathan ate standing up, eyes unfocused, mind already turning toward the unknown meeting Reed had mentioned. At 11:45, another message arrived. A location. No address, just coordinates. The place was an old ferry terminal on the southern edge of the city, decommissioned years ago and mostly forgotten. Nathan drove there with Argo riding in the back seat, the city thinning out around them. The terminal loomed ahead, concrete and glass, weathered by salt and time. A single black sedan waited in the lot. Thomas Reed stood beside it. Reed was in his early 60s, tall and lean, with a posture that suggested decades of enforced calm. His hair was silver, cut short, and his beard neatly trimmed, framing a face marked by lines that spoke of hard decisions made quickly. His eyes were pale gray, observant and unflinching. He wore a simple coat and slacks, nothing that announced authority. Everything about him suggested someone who had learned long ago that power worked best when it wasn't obvious. Reed nodded at Nathan as he approached. His gaze flicked briefly to Argo, then returned. "Still working together," he said. "Always," Nathan replied. Reed gestured toward the terminal. "Walk with me." They moved side by side through the empty building, footsteps echoing softly. Reed spoke without preamble. "What happened to you after Fallujah was mishandled?" he said. "Politics, not performance. It happens." Nathan stopped walking. "If this is about clearing my record—" "It's not," Reed interrupted gently. "Records are paper. I'm interested in people." Nathan studied him. "And you think I'm one." "I know you are," Reed said. "You didn't step in last night because you wanted credit. You stepped in because you couldn't not." They reached a wide window overlooking the water. Ferries passed in the distance, indifferent. Reed turned to face Nathan fully. "There's a task force," Reed said. "Small, quiet, no patches, no press. When something falls between jurisdictions, when it's too sensitive or too complicated for official channels, they call us." Nathan said nothing. We don't ask for loyalty, Reed continued. We ask for judgment. The words settled between them, heavy with implication. Reed took a step back. You don't have to decide today. In fact, I'd prefer you didn't. But I wanted you to know the door exists. Nathan looked out at the water, then down at Argo, who stood at his side, steady and patient. Whatever this is, Nathan said finally, it's going to put a target on my back. Reed smiled slightly. It already has. Nathan nodded once. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and steel. The city waited, unaware that lines were being redrawn. The ferry terminal emptied itself of echoes as the morning advanced. Light crept through high windows, washing the concrete floor in pale bands that smelled faintly of salt and rust. Nathan Cole stood where Thomas Reed had left him, hands resting at his sides, posture relaxed in the way that came only after a decision had already been made somewhere deeper than thought. Argo stood beside him, steady and patient, his graying muzzle lifted toward the air, as if listening for something only he could hear. Nathan did not chase Reed's departing sedan with his eyes. He had learned long ago that some doors, once shown, did not need to be watched as they closed. They waited. He left the terminal with Argo at his heel and drove back toward the city, the water sliding past on his left, ferries cutting clean lines through the bay. Seattle resumed its ordinary pace, delivery trucks, commuters, the quiet insistence of routine. Nathan welcomed the normalcy. It gave shape to the weight he carried. At home, the phone rang again. This time, the number was familiar. "Cole," Detective Mark Alvarez said without preamble. His voice was roughened by a long night. "You got a minute?" Nathan glanced at Argo, now settled near the window, watching the street with habitual vigilance. "I do." "Kane's lawyer's already making noise," Alvarez continued, "claiming misconduct, excessive force. You know the drill." "I do," Nathan said evenly. "But," Alvarez added, and there it was, the pause that meant something had shifted. The container was worse than we thought. Not just stolen medical supplies, experimental gear, restricted distribution, federal agencies are stepping in. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. People could have been hurt. "They already were," Alvarez replied. "Because you didn't look away, they won't be again." Nathan absorbed that in silence. "Listen," Alvarez said, tone softening. "Whatever happens next, I wanted you to hear this from me. Frank Delaney asked for you." Nathan's chest tightened. "How is he?" "Awake, stubborn, wants to thank the man who kept him alive." Nathan nodded once. "Tell him I'm glad he's still here." "I will," Alvarez said. "And Cole?" "Yes." "You made the right call." The line went dead. Nathan set the phone down and stood still for a moment longer than necessary. He wasn't searching for validation. He didn't need it. But hearing it, spoken plainly, mattered more than he expected. That afternoon, Sarah Whitaker stopped by again. She didn't bring food this time, just herself and a cautious smile. She leaned against the doorframe, studying Nathan with the same calm curiosity she had shown since the beginning. "You look like someone who's decided something," she said. Nathan considered that. "I suppose I have." She nodded. "You don't have to tell me." He appreciated that more than words could say. "I won't," he replied. Sarah's gaze dropped to Argo, who rose slowly and approached her, sniffing her hand before allowing a brief scratch behind the ears. At 12, he accepted affection on his terms, measured and dignified. "He's older," Sarah said softly. "Yeah," Nathan agreed, "but he still knows who he is." Sarah smiled, then straightened. "Whatever road you're choosing," she said, "just make sure it leaves room for the people who might want to walk beside you." Nathan watched her go, the door closing gently behind her, and knew that he would remember those words. The meeting Reed had offered did not happen that day, or the next. Instead, it came quietly a week later, in the form of a single envelope slipped beneath Nathan's door. No return address. Inside, a card with a time, a place, and a simple instruction. "Come alone. Bring the dog." The location was a training facility an hour outside the city, tucked into a stand of evergreens where the air smelled clean and sharp. Nathan arrived early. Argo moved with care over the gravel, age making itself known in the stiffness of his gait, but his eyes remained clear. A man waited near the entrance, leaning against a rail with the easy posture of someone who belonged anywhere he stood. Daniel Cross was in his early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick salt-and-pepper beard and hair pulled back into a short tie. A jagged scar traced one cheekbone, old, clean, the kind earned and never discussed. His eyes were warm but assessing, the gaze of a man who measured others by action rather than promise. Years ago, a mission gone wrong had taken half his team. It had left him quieter, more deliberate. "You're Cole," Cross said, offering a hand. Nathan shook it. "You're not Reed." Cross smiled faintly. "No, I'm the one who makes sure the people Reed finds don't get lost." He knelt to Argo's level without hesitation, offering the back of his hand. The shepherd sniffed, then accepted the contact with a low huff of approval. "Good dog," Cross said, "still sharp." Nathan followed Cross inside. The facility was modest, no banners, no insignia, just open space, clean equipment, and the quiet competence of people who knew exactly why they were there. A woman passed them carrying a medical kit. She was in her 40s, dark-skinned, hair cropped short, posture precise. Lena Morales, former Army medic, now instructor. She gave Nathan a nod of recognition that felt earned. Cross gestured to a bench overlooking the training floor. "We don't need an answer today," he said, "but I think you already have one." Nathan watched a pair of trainees move through a rescue drill below, controlled, focused, alive to consequence. He thought of Kane, of Frank Delaney, of a city that didn't know how close it had come to something worse. He thought of Argo, of years measured in missions and the quiet spaces between them. "I'm not coming back the way I was," Nathan said finally. Cross nodded. "We wouldn't ask you to." "I won't break laws," Nathan continued, "and I won't leave people behind." Cross's expression softened, just a fraction. "Then you'll fit in just fine." They shook hands, not a contract, a commitment. Nathan didn't start work the next day, or the week after. The transition was deliberate, careful. He trained with the team when needed, advised when asked, and learned when to step back. Argo became a fixture at the facility, his presence a quiet reminder of loyalty and time. When his joints ached too much, he rested in the sun. When the younger dogs trained, he watched, tail thumping once in approval. Months passed. Frank Delaney recovered fully. He visited once, moving slower now, gratitude worn openly on his face. He brought treats for Argo and a handshake for Nathan that lingered just long enough to say what words couldn't. Victor Kane disappeared into the system, his reach severed, his network dismantled piece by piece. He would not be Nathan's problem again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the city lights began to glow, Nathan walked Argo along the water. The dog moved slowly now, age finally asserting itself, but his presence remained steady. They stopped where the ferries passed, the air cool and clean. "We did all right," Nathan said quietly. Argo looked up at him, eyes bright, tail wagging once. The world did not need saving every day. Sometimes, it only needed someone willing to stand up when it mattered, and to know when to stand down after. Nathan Cole had found his place again, not in shadows, not in silence, but in the space where judgment mattered more than orders, and loyalty was measured by lives protected rather than rules followed. He turned for home, the city welcoming him back not with ceremony, but with peace. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or bright light from the sky. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, through tired hands that refuse to give up, through a loyal dog that stands guard in the dark, through a man who chooses to do what is right even when no one is watching. This story reminds us that God often works through ordinary people placed in extraordinary moments. Not everyone hears a voice from heaven, but many of us feel a gentle pull in our hearts telling us, "Don't walk away, stay, help, stand." In our daily lives, we may never face docks in the rain or dangerous strangers in the night, but we all face moments where someone is hurting, afraid, or forgotten. And in those moments, choosing kindness, courage, and compassion may be the very miracle God is asking us to become. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who may be feeling lost or alone right now. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching. From Your Words Matter More Than You Know. And if stories like this remind you that hope still exists in this world, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can walk this journey together. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and place peace in your heart today. May no child, no animal, and no weary soul ever have to face fear alone. And may we all recognize the quiet miracles when they appear, sometimes disguised as ordinary people doing the right thing. Amen.